The reality of it all still stings every time I say it out loud. I have 2 kids, one now 14, the other 16 and 4 years after the divorce. We had a rhythm that felt almost like healing. 50-50 custody. A steady 2 homes, but still one family orbit. For a while, I could pretend that divorce hadn't broken everything. We'd cook meals together in my kitchen, sometimes even laugh about the smallest things, like how the dog always barked at the mail carrier, no matter which house he was at. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. That balance became the center of my life. After the divorce, my world shrank and then reformed entirely around those weeks when my kids were with me. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. The way you start counting your life, not in months, but in custody exchanges. The way silence in the house can feel heavier than any argument you've ever had. But that 50-50 split gave me a sense of purpose. It told me I was still dad, still present, still needed. Then, 4 years ago, everything began to crack. My ex-wife remarried. I told myself it wouldn't change much, that another adult in their lives might even be good for them. But her new husband had other ideas. He suggested no, encouraged her to start a custody dispute. Maybe he thought he was protecting her. Maybe he wanted control. Maybe he just didn't like me. I'll never really know. What I do know is that one conversation in their kitchen led to a chain reaction that would burn through almost every ounce of hope and savings I had. I hired a lawyer immediately. I had no choice. My ex-wife's father is wealthy old money, wealthy, and from day one he paid every one of her legal fees. That meant her side could fight endlessly, filing motion after motion, dragging hearings out for months. For me, every hour my attorney worked came out of my pocket. By the time we got close to trial, I'd spent $165,000, my life savings, the college fund I'd started, the cushion I'd built after the divorce. Gone, just gone. I remember sitting in my attorney's office as she spread out files across her desk. "We're going to fight like hell," she said. She had this fire in her eyes, the kind that makes you think maybe justice is possible. I clung to that. I wanted to believe the court would see what I saw. A dad who had shown up, who had built his life around his kids, who wasn't perfect but was trying. But courts don't deal in hope. They deal in preferences, in precedents, in an invisible calculus that feels cold when you're on the receiving end. The older child told the court-appointed therapist they wanted to live with their mum and only see me every other weekend. Hearing that was like a knife to the chest. I could picture them sitting in that sterile office, probably feeling torn, maybe even pressured. But all the court heard was preference. The younger one said at first they wanted to keep fit. That gave me some hope. But later, after months of hearings, they changed their mind to maybe 70-30 with mum, they told the therapist. "I just want court stuff to be over." That sentence haunts me. I just want court stuff to be over. It's the kind of thing you never want to hear from your child. They're supposed to worry about homework and crushes and sports, not custody schedules. But we'd all been dragged into it, and the court took their words at face value. When trial day came, I sat at the table next to my attorney, a stack of evidence folders at our feet, my hands shaking. Across the aisle, my ex-wife looked calm. Her husband sat behind her like some silent sentinel. The judge walked in. Everyone rose. My heart pounded in my ears. My attorney argued every point: my involvement in school, the medical appointments I'd attended, the stability of my home. She spoke like someone trying to build a bridge out of a battlefield. Then the judge spoke. His voice was measured, almost gentle, but every word felt like a hammer. Given the children's age, he said, their preference will take precedence, and we will not split them up, as it would break their sibling bond. That was it. The gavel might as well have been a door slamming shut. In that moment, everything I'd fought for crumbled. Years of shared custody gone. The rhythm we'd built together, school pickups, Sunday dinners, quiet evenings doing homework collapsed into a schedule I hadn't chosen. I wanted to shout, to tell the judge he didn't see what I saw. But you can't fight a verdict. You can only live in its aftermath. I walked out of the courthouse and into the parking lot where the summer sun was blinding. My attorney put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said. I nodded, unable to speak. That day I felt like a stranger in my own life. Back at my house, the rooms felt emptier than ever. The kids were with their mum that week. I sat at the kitchen table, stared at the unpaid bills, and thought about the years I'd lost, not just money, but time, faith, maybe even pieces of myself. Friends told me I'd done everything I could, that I'd fought for my kids, that I should be proud. But pride is a hollow meal when you're alone in a quiet house. I tried to keep the door open for them, texts, calls, want to come over. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. I told myself it was just an adjustment, that kids change, that teenagers drift. But at night, lying in bed, I'd replay the judge's words, my children's words, and wonder what I could have done differently. I also tried to rebuild my life outside of being a father. My wife, my second marriage, had been patient through all of it. She knew how much the fight had drained me. We started making small plans, trips with her friends, dinners out, things that felt almost normal. I told myself I needed to reclaim some happiness. To remember I wasn't just a man losing custody, but a husband, a friend, a human being. Still, every time I looked at the calendar and saw the days my kids weren't with me, the guilt surged. That guilt became a shadow I carried everywhere, work, home, even into moments that should have been joyful. Because no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed them. One night, sitting alone in the living room, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. There they were, my kids at the park, my kids on Halloween, my kids grinning as they built a snowman in my yard. I'd been there for all of it. Yet now, by a judge's decree and their own shifting words, I was sidelined. That was the night I promised myself I wouldn't let bitterness take over. I couldn't be the dad who turned his pain into a weapon, but I also couldn't keep living as if nothing had changed. I had to start acknowledging what the new reality meant, not just for me, but for them. Because at some point, you have to stop fighting a war you've already lost. Even now, retelling this, I can feel my jaw clench. For years of my life, $165,000, every ounce of energy, and the outcome was still a loss. But I also know this is where the story really starts. Not the divorce, but the slow, painful process of figuring out how to father from the margins. It's strange. In court, you think the verdict is the ending. But in reality, it's only the prologue to a different kind of battle. One without lawyers or judges, but one that still tests you every single day. When the dust of the trial settled, I thought maybe, just maybe, the kids would still come around. That even though the court had reshaped our lives, the bond between us would anchor them back to me. For a few months, I clung to that hope. I texted them constantly. I made sure the house was ready for their visits' favorite foods stocked, the little rituals we'd built over the years, waiting for them like an old sweater in a closet. But the shift was unmistakable. The older one, 16 now, had fully embraced life at their mum's. They texted less, stopped mentioning school projects or new friends, started treating my weekends as an obligation instead of a homecoming. The younger one still came more willingly, still called me for advice, still seemed torn, but even they began to slip into their new normal, new routines, new alliances. It wasn't malicious. It was gravity. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of them taller now, more guarded, carrying the weight of adolescence on their faces, and think they're becoming strangers to me. It's a brutal thought for a parent. You spend years waking up to the sound of their footsteps, making their lunches, driving them to practice, and then one day you realize you don't know what their favorite song is anymore. You don't know who sits with them at lunch. You don't even know the inside jokes they're texting about. The hardest part wasn't losing time. It was losing the tiny, invisible threads that made us a family. And yet, I tried. I tried to make the most of the time we did have. Movie nights, hikes, cooking dinner together. Little things that said, I'm still here. I'm still dad. But kids are smart. They can sense when you're trying too hard. One night, the younger one blurted, Dad, it's fine. We're just busy, I nodded, pretending it didn't feel like a punch. I also began to notice how my ex-wife and her husband wove themselves into the kids. Narrative, trips, parties, a bigger house. More friends, more fun. I couldn't compete, and I didn't want to, but it was impossible not to feel like the grey, practical parent while they got to be the colourful, spontaneous ones. And when the kids started parroting little phrases, it's easier at mum's, or we don't have to worry about that at mum's, I felt like I was losing not just their time, but their loyalty. All of this weighed on me as my wife and I planned our trip. It had been years since we'd done something for ourselves. Years since we'd stepped out of the courtroom's shadow. Her sister, her friends, their husbands, they'd all pitched in, found dates, booked flights. 9 days in Spain and France. It sounded like oxygen. A break. A chance to breathe after holding my breath for 4 years. I didn't hide the trip from the kids. I mentioned it casually at first. We're going to Europe in the spring, I said one evening. It'll be nice to get away for a bit. They nodded but didn't say much. I figured they'd forgotten then. A week later, the questions started. Where exactly are you going? The younger one asked. Barcelona, Paris, some of the smaller towns, I said. Who's going? Your stepmom's friends, her sister and husband. A whole group, their eyes narrowed. Is it adults only? No, I admitted. Your cousin's coming. He's 15. That's when the dam broke. That's not fair, the older one said. Why can't we go? I felt the ground shift under me. Because it's something we planned. We saved for it. But you can afford it, the younger one pressed. It's not like you're broke. I could hear the edge in their voices, the assumption, the entitlement, the anger. I'd spent years trying to shield them from the financial toll of the custody fight. I didn't want them to see me as the poor parent. But here it was. They thought I had endless resources, just like their mum's side did. This is the only chance we'll get to travel. Internationally, the older one said. It was like being cornered. I took a breath and said the thing I'd been holding in for months. You're young adults now. You chose to spend the majority of your time with your mother, and you got what you wanted. But choices have consequences. One of them is that you don't get to join me on things like this. Silence. Then the younger one's voice, trembling. You're just mad we have more fun at Mum's house. That cut deep. Not because it was true, but because it was what they believed. I wanted to shout, I'm mad because I lost you. But I didn't. I just stood there, my heart pounding, wondering if I'd just ruined whatever was left between us. In the days that followed, I replayed that conversation over and over. Was I being fair? Was I punishing them for a choice they didn't fully understand? Or was I finally drawing a boundary that needed to be drawn? I remembered all the nights sitting in court, the money I'd drained, the compromises I'd made. I remembered my attorney saying, "You're doing this for your kids." And I wondered, at what point does fighting for them turn into fighting with them? Sometimes, late at night, I'd draft texts I never sent. I'm sorry, I love you. I wish things were different, but I'd delete them. Not because I didn't mean them, but because I didn't know if they'd help or just make things worse. My wife tried to reassure me. They'll understand someday, she said. You're teaching them about responsibility. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Because when it comes to kids, consequences don't always look like lessons. Sometimes they just look like distance. The weeks rolled by. The trip got closer. The kids stayed upset. They texted less. When they came over, the air felt heavy, like we were all waiting for an apology that never came. I tried to keep things normal, made their favorite meals. Asked about school, but there was a wall between us now. One evening, the younger ones sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling on their phone. Mum says you're being petty, they muttered without looking up. I froze. Is that what she told you? They shrugged. She just said, it's not fair. I swallowed hard. I'm not being petty, I said quietly. I'm trying to show you that life is about choices. They didn't respond after they left that weekend. I sat alone in the living room, the silence louder than ever. I thought about my father, about how he used to lecture me about responsibility but never took me anywhere. Was I becoming him? Was I passing on the same wounds I swore I'd never inflict? And yet, part of me still believed I was right. I had bent over backwards for years. I had fought until I was empty. At some point, don't you have to stop giving? Don't you have to let them learn, even if it hurts? I don't know the answer. All I know is that fatherhood isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 choices, 1,000 risks, 1,000 ways to love and lose and hope again. This was one of mine. As the departure date approached, I packed my bags with a heaviness I couldn't shake. 9 days in Europe should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like a verdict of its own. The morning of our flight, I woke before dawn. My wife was still asleep beside me, her suitcase zipped and ready in the corner. Outside, the streetlights glowed against the empty road. For a moment, I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, wondering if I'd made the right call. 9 days in Europe should have felt like a celebration, a reward for surviving for brutal years. Instead, it felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I thought about texting the kids one more time. I love you. I'll miss you. I wish you could come. But I didn't. They already knew. Or at least, I hoped they did. At the airport, as we moved through security and boarding gates, I caught myself staring at families traveling together, parents shepherding kids through lines, Teenagers rolling their eyes at everything, siblings arguing over snacks. I remembered when that was us, before lawyers, before custody disputes, before the words preference and primary residence became part of my children's vocabulary. On the plane, my wife squeezed my hand. "They'll be okay," she whispered. I nodded, but my stomach churned. Because what if okay meant okay without me? We landed in Barcelona to bright sun and the smell of salt and stone. We walked cobblestone streets, ate tapas under strings of lights, watched street performers in the plazas. It was everything I'd imagined. Beautiful, alive, full of color. But everywhere I looked, I saw the spaces my kids would have filled, the jokes they would have made, the photos they would have taken at night, lying in the hotel bed. I scrolled through my phone. No new texts. No, have fun, Dad. Not even an emoji. Just silence. I told myself they were busy. I told myself this was normal teenage detachment. But in my heart, it felt like distance hardening into something else. On the fourth day, while we were driving along the coast to a small fishing town, my phone buzzed. A text from the younger one. "We're at Mum's, bored. Hope you're having fun." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I typed back, "I miss you. I'll be home soon. We'll do something special when I get back." No reply. That night at dinner, my wife's sister asked how the kids were. I smiled, said they were fine, changed the subject. But later, walking back to the hotel, my wife slipped her arm through mine. "You're thinking about them," she said. "Always," I admitted. "You're not wrong to take this trip," she said. "You're allowed to live, too." Her words were kind, but they didn't reach the part of me that was still Dad before anything else. When we got to Paris, I tried to let go. We climbed the Eiffel Tower, wandered through the Louvre, sat at cafes sipping coffee while street musicians played. I laughed more than I expected. There were moments when I felt like myself again, not just the man who lost custody, but the man who still had a life. And yet, even in those moments, my kids were there in the background, in the silence between conversations, in the photos I didn't take. On the flight home, turbulence rattled the plane. I stared out the window at the clouds, thinking about what waited for me. The kids, still upset. My ex-wife, probably ready to stoke the fire. A house that felt less like home every month. When we landed, my phone lit up with notifications. One was from the older one. "Mum says you're back. Can you drive us to practice?" I blinked at the screen. After weeks of anger, after all the silence, here was a request mundane, practical, but a bridge nonetheless. Of course, I typed back. "I'll pick you up at 4. Driving them to practice felt surreal. They got in the car, earbuds in, scrolling on their phones. I wanted to say 1,000 things. Instead, I asked how school was. They shrugged. "Fine." I asked about their friends. Another shrug. But then, out of nowhere, the younger one said, "Did you have fun on your trip?" I hesitated. "Yeah," I said. "It was beautiful. I wish you could have seen it." They glanced at me, a flicker of something regret, maybe, crossing their face. "Maybe next time," they murmured. "Maybe next time." The words hung in the air like a fragile truce. That night, after I dropped them off, I sat in my driveway for a long time. I thought about the past 4 years, the courtrooms, the bills, the arguments. I thought about the trip, the guilt, the empty spaces, and I realized something. Fatherhood isn't about winning or losing custody. It isn't even about being the fun parent or the strict one. It's about showing up, even when it hurts. It's about being there, even from the margins. I had drawn a line with the Europe trip, and maybe that line had been necessary. Maybe it had been selfish. Maybe it was both. But the story didn't end there. Stories rarely do, because as much as I wanted to teach them about consequences, they were teaching me about resilience. About how love changes shape but doesn't disappear. About how, even when bonds stretch thin, they can still hold. In the weeks after the trip, things didn't magically fix themselves. The kids were still closer to their mum. The schedule was still lopsided. But there were small shift texts about homework, calls for advice, a hug that lasted a little longer than before. I held on to those. One evening, we sat in the living room watching an old movie we used to love. The younger one leaned against me for just a second, the way they used to when they were little. It was nothing. It was everything. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day they'll understand the choices I made. Maybe they won't, but I've stopped seeing fatherhood as a series of battles to be won. It's a long road, a long story, and some chapters are harder than others. This is one of mine.